I trust you've all had a restful, challenging, productive week. Many challenges. Speaking for myself, many challenges. But it is a pleasure to fellowship with you today. If we open up in a word of prayer to begin. Our gracious God above, creator of the world, creator of the universe, creator of all the marvelous things that all speak to your glory. We are truly thankful for the opportunity to come before you and worship you and study more about you, to try and unwrap and understand all the complexities around us, to identify ourselves in you, identify your plan for us, identify what our role and our purpose is as we navigate through the complexities of life. We put before you the Sabbath school. We ask that you guide our thoughts, you guide our discussion, and at the end of it, we may walk away with just a little bit of increased knowledge that we can implement in our day-to-day, in our practical lives. I thank you, Lord, in your holy and precious name. Amen. I was supposed to take this lesson 2 weeks ago, but unfortunately, the first week I was unwell. The second week we had a family bereavement, and then Alistair and Adriana, more correctly, gave birth to a healthy baby boy, baby Judah. Lovely. It was a lovely moment, but it was a mixed week, to say the least. So my family were over at Alistair and Adriana, helping them on the Sabbath evening, and that went well into the late hours of the morning. So I had struggled to get all my thoughts on a piece of paper. And then this week, as fate would have it, as the saying goes, my throat gave up again last night. So I was struggling through the night, but I've taken some throat lozenges and hopefully it holds up for this discussion. And I want to reiterate that this is a discussion. I've tried preaching in the past and I'm not good at it. I don't think we believe we preach anymore. We rather have presentations and discussions. So for the next 30, 45 minutes, I'm going to facilitate a discussion, if you may. So I'll give you some of my thoughts, and then hopefully that will spark a debate. And at the end of it, we can walk away with some thoughts or some conclusions. My text actually comes from, my focus of study comes from the book of Habakkuk, chapter 1. We may all be familiar with it. It's the vision that God has with Habakkuk. Habakkuk is crying out to the Lord. And I'll read the first 11 verses. The burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear me? Even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. Why dost thou show me iniquity and cause me to behold grievance? For spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that rise up strife and contention. Therefore the law is slacked, and judgment doth never go forth. For the wicked doth compass about the righteous, therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. And special emphasis on verse 5. Behold ye among the heathen, and regard, and wonder marvelously, for I work a work in your days which ye will not believe, though it be told you. For lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves. Their horses are also swifter than leopards, and are more fierce than the evening wolves. And their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from far. They shall fly as the eagle that hasteth to eat. They shall come or for violence. Their faces shall up as the east wind, and they shall gather the captivity as the sand. And they shall scoff at the kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. And they shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap dust and take it. Then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and offend, imputing this his power unto his God. So if I can share my screen, am I allowed to share my screen? So
yeah, you can do that. You'll be able to do that yourself, Courtney.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Not yet. Oh, yes, I can now.
Okay. So whenever I do a presentation or discussion, I like to have a PowerPoint so I can convey whatever I'm talking to with the audience. In this instance, the PowerPoint is more for myself to guide my thoughts. Yeah, just to keep my mind on track, because I may wander off the topic. This topic is called Navigating the Complex. Aldatis last year, I think February, did a couple of presentations during the Vesper series, and I highly recommend that or encourage you to watch those presentations. They're always relevant, and in a recent post you may have watched, she did encourage us to go back and watch that series or those series of Vesper presentations. The ones that I'm focusing on were entitled Navigating the Complex, and she brought up a very interesting, important point, I believe, which is something I have been struggling with a little bit. So again, this presentation is less about me delivering something to you. It's more about me presenting my struggle, and then hopefully through the discussion, I can find a resolution to some of my questions. So if you will indulge me for a few minutes, I do have a YouTube video, but I'm not sure the best way of playing it, or I can send the link in the chat and you can watch it. It's 10 minutes. I appreciate that's a little bit long, but it really emphasizes the point I'm trying to make. So if the moderator...
I would try and play it so people who are watching the recording can watch it as well.
Okay.
So
I don't know whether your sound will work. You can have a go. If not, do it the second way, plan B.
Okay. Can you confirm if you can hear the volume when I press play?
I think you have to do something your end, don't you? Can you play it again?
There should be somewhere share sound. I can't remember where to.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say it was Curtis who helped me to do that. You've got to do it on Zoom, so that to unlock it on there.
Okay.
I think it might be on the mute button.
I saw a button that said share sound, so here we go.
By zooming out to where we can see our nearest cosmic
Yes, we can hear that. We hear that, Courtney.
But the moon is very close to Earth since
Can you make the screen bigger as well, please?
Okay, so I'm starting now.
Ever known is located right here. But just how small exactly is Earth when compared to the scale of the entire universe? Let's start by zooming out to where we can see our nearest cosmic neighbor, the moon. You may think that the moon is very close to Earth since it dominates our night skies, but in reality the moon isn't this close to our planet, it's actually about this far away. 384,400 kilometers away from you right now on average. You could fit 30 entire Earths in between this distance, and if you somehow were able to drive a car at a constant 100 kilometers per hour speed, it would take you about 160 days to drive the entire distance. Despite this incredible distance, however, 12 humans have actually set foot here, representing the furthest away that any individual human has ever been away from the Earth, and one of humanity's greatest achievements. This is what the Earth would look like from there if you were standing there with them, and if you wanted to communicate with somebody back at home, it would take a message about 2.5 seconds to travel between you and them, since that's how fast the speed of light can travel at. This is a photo that was taken on Mars, and that tiny dot that you see there is Earth as seen from the Martian surface. On average, Mars is an incredible 225 million kilometers away from Earth, but that distance can be as high as 401 million kilometers. That means that whenever humanity finally gets around to landing a human on the planet, that person will be 986 times further away from Earth than the astronauts who landed on the Moon were. In addition, the time delay for sending a message from Mars back to Earth isn't just 2.5 seconds, it's actually more like 20 minutes each direction, which would render instant communication in the event of an emergency impossible. When we zoom out even further away, we can find the Voyager 1 space probe, which is the furthest away man-made object from Earth. It is currently located 138 AUs from the Earth, AU meaning astronomical unit, which is the distance between the Earth and the Sun, which means that Voyager 1 is 138 times further away from us than the Sun is. At some point on its long voyage, Voyager 1 turned its camera around and took this photograph. It may not look like much at first, but in my opinion, this is the greatest single photograph ever taken in all of human history. This tiny, pale blue dot is Earth, and I don't think that anybody has ever said something as amazing about this as Carl Sagan when he said, "If you look at it, you see a dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever lived out their lives. The aggregate of all our joys and sufferings. Thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines. Every hunter and every forager. Every hero and coward. Every creator and destroyer of civilizations. Every king and every peasant. Every young couple in love. Every hopeful child. Every mother and every father. Every inventor and explorer. Every teacher of morals. Every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. Voyager 1 is currently traveling at 17 kilometers every single second, but even at that speed, it won't break out of the reach of our solar system for another 30,000 years. Once we go beyond the solar system, we arrive in our interstellar neighborhood. Here we shift to the light-year unit of measurement, which is the distance that light travels in a full Earth year, or about 9.461 trillion kilometers. The star Proxima Centauri here is the closest other star to us other than our Sun, but it's still 4.24 light-years away from us. To put that into perspective, if it was heading in the right direction, it would still take Voyager 1 over 70,000 years to reach it. In other words, if you drove your car at 100 kilometers an hour like in our previous example to the Moon, it would take over 6 times longer than the entire age of the universe is just to finally get there, and it wouldn't even exist still when you arrived. When we zoom out even further, we can see the entire Milky Way galaxy, inside of which Earth is located right here. This yellow dot is the furthest extent of humanity's radio broadcasts throughout history, which means that any possible aliens who live outside of this range are totally unaware of humanity's presence. It's complete silence outside of this yellow dot as far as we are currently aware, but the entire galaxy spans over 100,000 light years from end to end. There are over 100 billion stars and over 100 billion planets inside of our galaxy. But you have never seen the full glory of the galaxy at night, because 99% of the stars that you can see with the naked eye are limited to this small, tiny region right here. But even this massive galaxy out there, zooming out even further, and we arrive at the local group of galaxies, a collection of 54 different galaxies that is about 10 million light years across. But zooming out even further, and we can see the Virgo supercluster, of which the local group here is just a tiny segment of. There are at least 100 other groups of galaxies just like our own local group inside of here, and the distance from one side to the other is a mind-numbing 110 million light years. But even the massive Virgo supercluster is nothing but a quiet and tiny lobe of the Great Laniakea supercluster, an enormous structure that is home to our galaxy as well as 100,000 other galaxies. The distance from one side to the other is 520 million light years, but from even there we can zoom out all the way to the entire observable universe and see that even the titanic Laniakea supercluster is just a tiny and insignificant part of everything. This is the observable universe, and it contains everything that we know of. It is home to at least 2 trillion different and individual galaxies, which together contain more stars than there are grains of sand on the entire Earth. The distance from Earth to any side of the observable universe is 46.5 billion light years, which means that the entire width is 93 billion light years across. What's perhaps even more interesting, however, is what actually lies beyond the observable universe. Keep in mind that the observable universe is all that we can currently see, and it's entirely possible that the rest of the universe outside of it is vastly larger and more fantastic than we can possibly ever imagine. We simply don't know what else is out there because the light from these incredibly distant places has not yet had enough time in the universe's history to reach us yet back on Earth, and the light from some places may never reach us at all. Because some parts of space very far away from Earth are expanding away from us faster than the speed of light, that means that the light from these places will never, in an infinite amount of time, reach Earth. Meaning that even if humanity is eternal and exists forever, there will still be an unknown number of places in the universe that we will never know about or ever see. So, it is very likely that as unbelievably enormous as it seems, the observable universe is just a tiny slice of what we can currently see of the entire universe. According to the theory of cosmic inflation that was proposed by Dr. Alan Guth, if it is assumed that cosmic inflation began at 10 to the negative 37th of a second after the Big Bang, and with the assumption that the size of the universe before inflation began was equal to its age times the speed of light, then this would seem to suggest that at the present day, the entire universe is 150 sextillion times larger than the observable universe. That number for reference looks like this, with this many zeros. Let this number sink in for just a moment. This would be similar to you thinking that the entire observable universe, everything that you could see, was the size of a light bulb, but then realizing that in reality the entire universe is larger than the former planet of Pluto. Imagine a light bulb in the center of Pluto, but we inside the light bulb were totally unaware that Pluto existed outside of it, and that's a similar situation to this. We are all so unbelievably small, but you shouldn't worry, because all that means is that there is so much left out there for us to discover together.
What's up, guys? Today...
Thank you for indulging me for a few minutes. A couple of points I want to make out is the last theory that the gentleman narrated on is ultimately a theory limited by our understanding of how the universe and physics work. I don't subscribe to all of it, but broadly, this gives an understanding of how grand the universe and the stars and everything is, obviously limited by our understanding. I'm also going to share with you a picture. I don't know how many of you know about the James Webb Telescope. It's one of my most fascinating human inventions, I believe. And it took a picture. This is one of its first pictures. If you held a grain of sand at the tip of your finger and you stretched it out, this is the region of space that that grain of sand would have covered if you're looking at it. And if we zoom in, you can just have an idea as to how enormous space actually is and how complex it is. So if we zoom in, each one of these spirals is a galaxy, like our Milky Way, and then within that galaxy, there's hundreds of millions of stars. Each star system has its own set of planets. It's quite fascinating. Extremely fascinating. But the point here is how complex and grand the universe and God's creation is. So if anyone is interested, you can go onto this website and you can see all of the images and zoom in and play around, and it's quite fascinating. But the point is how complex God's universe is. And I'm going to read a couple of texts from the Bible. So the first one, obviously, I'm sure most people are aware of, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was void and darkness was upon the face of the deep, right? In just one sentence, a couple of sentences, we're given the idea that God created everything. And it's such a simple statement that masks how incredibly complex God's creation actually is. And the same can be done, a similar study can be done on the human body and all the different species under the planet. They all encapsulated in a couple of sentences. And then Genesis 2:1, thus the heavens and the earth were finished and all the host of them. And we read, so I'm going to talk from personal experience. I read through this, maybe others have, and it's almost like a side note. Oh, God created heaven and earth. And we move on to the next sentence, the next chapter, without fully comprehending the complexity that is encapsulated in just that couple of sentences. The last one is Psalms 19. And again, V1, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. And you can go on and read. But again, encapsulating the points that there are texts in the Bible that are not focused on, but hide the incredible intricacies and complexities of or the reality. And this is now my focus. So I like to give a small parable related to nature before delving into the meat of this here. And this is my struggle. So, and Elder Tess, in her videos on navigating the complex, referenced this here and gave a couple of examples. So the first one being the 7 trumpets. And as they are presented and as you read them in Revelation, it looks like they are very linear. So the first trumpet happens, then the second, then the third, then the fourth, and we move through time. And we'll take in previous histories, in the past, we just take it linear and say one event happens, then the next event, then the next event. But when you look at the reality, it's actually the first trumpet happens, then the second trumpet happens over a long period of time, then the third trumpet happens within the period of the second trumpet, and then the fourth trumpet happens some time after, and it's actually quite a short period. And the text, I'm almost going to say it's deceptive in its simplicity. And then we take that simplicity and apply it to many things, and it raises the risk of distortion. So we would distort the complexity or the intricacies of what's actually happening. So we view history like this here. Again, 1989 happens and we move forward, time of the end, the increase of knowledge, etc. And we view these as linear events because that's how they appear to us. But even within these, waymarks, these points, there's so much complexity that is masked by the waymarks. And sometimes the reality is that it actually looks like a scribbled mess and we can't understand it. But only after some time, if we take a step back, we actually start to see, okay, a pattern emerging. So our pattern of the waymarks, our lines, and we start to see the pattern, and we start to get a glimpse into the complexity of our reality. And Elder Tess went into examples of what does a Sunday law actually look like. And we would think it's a simple, she was relating, it was a simple Sunday Sabbath, law passed in American Congress, and the Adventist Church have taken that there, and it's what do I call it? It's a nice phrase or a nice idea. It's simple to understand, it's simple to digest. But in that simplicity, they're missing this complexity, and they overlook, the time of the end. They overlook the radical feminism. They overlook Russia's role in the world, and all of these things are messy and incredibly complex. She did make sure, or she reiterated that we're not rehabilitating say the evil, the bad people in this year, but she's just saying that if you look a little closer, it's not as simple as left v right or good v evil. It's a lot more complex. We're not saying that evil is not evil. We're just saying, if you look at it a little bit closer under the microscope, then it's far more complex than what it actually looks like. And to give another example of the Reformation in Calvin, and that while we read in the Great Controversy how important the Reformation was, how important these people were, and the message that they provided, when we actually start to look at their individual characters, an example, Abraham Lincoln as well, we start to see that many of these people were deeply flawed characters or people which held views that we wouldn't tolerate in our modern society. They've also had, say, a negative impact on how the world has progressed. But the simple is that the Reformation was good. It challenged papal supremacy and got people to understand that there were flaws in the papal understanding of the Bible. But in closer inspection, there is a lot more detail that is overlooked. The same as John the Baptist, that again, paraphrasing and badly paraphrasing at that, Elder Tess is like, yeah, we all would say, yeah, when we were in John the Baptist day, we would have clearly understood what Christ's mission was. It was there in front of her. How could they not understand? But when you delve a little bit closer, you'd see that it was a lot more complex. The Pharisees, you overlook how intelligent the Pharisees actually were. We overlook that they had been studying all of this, and there was more to it than them simply just rejecting. Even ultimately, that's what they did, and that's the simple. It's they committed one of the ultimate sins in rejecting, but it's a lot more complex. And this is maybe where my struggle is a little bit, and I'll come to it. So now I'm going to throw in one of my examples. So Elder Tess didn't mention this here, and maybe it's not a perfect example, but it's an example nonetheless. And I bring it up because it's one of my challenges, one of my specific challenges. And it's the text from Habakkuk. And it's if we recall, it's from verse 5. Behold, ye brethren, and regard and wonder marvelously, for I will work a work in your days, which you will not believe, though it be told you. And my thought or my challenge is that whenever we speak of last day events, and it came up a couple of weeks ago when we were trying to understand how does the message go across the world? Like, is everyone going to receive the message, understand it, and be tested by it? And there were two schools of thought. I don't know if it's been resolved, but the two schools of thought at that time were either the message goes to the whole world and everyone individually is challenged by the message at a personal level, or that only a select few people are actually going to be challenged and tested by it, the whole test. It may have been resolved, and forgive me if it has, and I'm a few weeks behind on this year. But that was the challenge that was in my mind, is that, okay, if it's to go to the whole world, then it has to be a wondrous work. And it brought my mind back to Habakkuk and this text of Babylon, who God is saying to Habakkuk, I'm going to raise up the Chaldeans. It's going to be a wonder, and it's going to be marvelous, and you won't believe what I'm about to do. I'm going to take this smaller kingdom, this essentially that was a tribe under the subjugation of Assyria, and I'm going to take them, and you're going to see what I'm going to do to the whole Near East region. I'm going to bring judgment upon all the surrounding nations through this village, this tribe that you people underestimate. And the parallels, or my compare and contrast, or my juxtaposition is that, okay, maybe this is what God is saying, that I'm going to do a wondrous work in terms of the message going out to the whole world. It's going to be swift. It's going to be an incredible work. And I take that as the simple. I took that as the simple, it's going to be a wonderful, marvelous work, and wow, it's going to be incredible. That's the simple. But then I started to read more about Assyria and Chaldea, or the Chaldeans. I'm going to read a couple of passages, mainly from this book. It's called The Cambridge Ancient History. And it's called, it's chapter 25 that I'll be reading from, and it's just a short paragraph, and it says, the reign of Adad Nalrari from 1307 to 1275 BC, the son of Adric Den Ili, inaugurated a period of rapid expansion of the Assyrian Empire. Under his able leadership and that of his immediate successor, Shalmaneser I, and Tukulti Ninurta, Assyria, in the course of some 80 years, greatly extended its territories and eventually emerged as one of the most powerful states of the Near East. Its success must in large part be attributed to the growing economic and military strength, to its political stability, and to the vigorous personalities of its kings. But it was also favored by the international situation, for the Hittite Empire, faced by far more urgent problems, both internal and external, was not in a position to offer sustained resistance to Assyrian expansion in Upper Mesopotamia. The conquests of Assyria, however, outran its capacity to hold and govern all that it had been gained, and its political decline was as meteoric as its rise. So that was the rise of Assyria, just to give you a scale of how powerful they were in that region. They were the feared, dominant group, a tribe, society, and they kind of ruled over the Near East. So Babylon wasn't even in the picture, and God was saying, yeah, that big kingdom, I'm absolutely going to destroy it with someone you would never think about. And now a bit of the Chaldean history. So Nabopolassar was a Chaldean that was able to take control over the civilization of Babylonia and eventually defeat the Assyrian Empire with a combined military alliance of people from throughout the region. Nabopolassar was the father of Nebuchadnezzar II, who oversaw the brief golden age of Neo-Babylonia. It was under the chief Chaldean dynasty that Babylonia saw a resurrection in culture and prestige that would last even through the time of Alexander the Great. Nabopolassar was instrumental in creating a military alliance that led to the final defeat of the Assyrian Empire. The death of King Ashurbanipal around 627 BC created massive internal chaos and instability within Assyria. conquering the city of Babylon first in 626 BC. He declared himself king of Babylonia. He made Babylon his new capital and united all the territories under his leadership to launch an assault on the Syrian capitals. He joined forces, I'm paraphrasing now, he joined forces with King Cyaxares and battled with Ashurbanipal's son Ashur-Ethil for control over Syria. So that battle was won by the Babylonians and eventually led to the defeat of the whole of the Syrian Empire, the last city of Nineveh. And we know this battle, it's called the Battle of Gilgamesh. We'd have studied it, it's in Kings, the Book of Kings. And the Babylonian king overthrew the Assyrian and Egyptian military alliance. And this led to the downfall of the Syrian Empire and the complete reign of Babylon. So in the text, and I relate back that a wondrous, marvelous work, which Habakkuk wouldn't believe, there's more as to why he wouldn't believe it. I'll touch on it, is because God was going to use such an evil nation to do his work. And Habakkuk couldn't understand that. And you read through the rest of the text, God is explaining his thought process to Habakkuk. But the idea that this small nation which had relatively little might, little influence, was able to go up against Assyria and Egypt and, utterly destroy them and lay waste and become the dominant force. It's a nice story that I've told myself that, God is going to work a wonder in these last days, and we won't even understand how it's done. In the same position of Habakkuk, because imagine Habakkuk looking back at that time. We can see it in our ways. How does the United States fall? They've maybe a few years ago, we'd have said, how does the United States fall? They're such a grand military, grand economic power, they strong structures. But as we've studied and delved into the complex, we can start to see how the social structures are actually falling apart, how the politics is poison and toxic and leading to a division in their societies and clearly marked lines of left v right, conservative and progressive. And we start to delve into the complexities and we can see, okay, this is how it happens. But when we read a simple text, I say simple, it's not simple at all, but if we boil it down to a simple verse, we can get, or I have overlooked how complex the world events actually is. And as a result, or my conclusion of that matter is that, are there other texts or other concepts that we hold on to, which if we dig beneath the surface, we start to see, okay, it's not as simple as maybe the text is actually saying. And this is so in conclusion, my thoughts. The universe is grand and almost unknowable from our human perspective. Simple statements in the Bible show how vast and incredibly complex God is. And if God is incredibly complex, it means that we are complicated beings. And we try and use parables to understand heavenly things, but even our earthly concepts or our earthly things can't truly represent heavenly things. So parables eventually, or I think, fall down eventually. The world doesn't feel as black and white as maybe I have been led to believe. Even heroes, so-called heroes, are deeply flawed individuals. I've mentioned Abraham Lincoln, Calvin, the founding fathers, Martin Luther. When you actually see their motives, their underlying characteristics or characters, some of these were in today's world, we'd cancel them, the so-called cancel. They weren't perfect people. God used evil to do his work, and I think this is a general theme throughout the Bible. We can comprehend that he raised up nations to discipline Israel, if you want to call it that. And as a result, I've taken simple statements and inferred grander narratives. And this is what Elder Tess was like warning against, that we can't distort the simple to make grand statements that don't actually reflect the reality. So it makes me nervous when I hear people speak in absolutes, because based on simple statements, I don't think we have, or in the past have had, enough information to definitively confirm or deny something. We have evidence to support an understanding, but as we've learned, as we've dug deeper, some of the understandings of the past get reframed or removed. And then the last point is, this is from Testimonies for the Church 9:11, very easy to remember. But the text is, Sister White writes that the last movements will be rapid. But what does that mean in the context of complexity? If I'm being honest, I thought the world was, we only had a few years left, and this was in like 2019. I thought within 5 years, 10 years max, that's it. That's the end of the world, you know. And maybe that's still true, but that's how I felt in 2019, that with absolute certainty, this was it. The last movements are rapid. God is going to raise up, or going to do a wonderful work in the land, and you know, everything is going to end quickly. And that was my, and maybe it was misinterpreted by me. I'll put my hand up. Yes.
I think we can still stand by what you're saying, because God has done a great work, and we've having all the light we're meant to have. We're on track. We've got the Midnight Cry message of quality. If you think about 2019 to where we are now, time has certainly been rapid, even though we had COVID, a lot of it, you know, we're all at home, days were long or whatever. The time still went extremely fast. So I think that the last days are rapid. I don't think we have a lot time longer. So I do think you were still correct. And I do think that, like Elder Paminda once said, that a good teacher is someone who brings the complex and makes it simple for us to understand. So I think that we've had the complex brought to us in a simple manner from Elder Tesson and Elder Paminda and others. So yeah, I think we're still on track, and I think you were right to think what you were thinking, because in those years of from 2019 to now was a very important years for the priest to prepare themselves. Like Elder Paminda said, you have to get yourself right, you as an individual, before anything else. Thanks.
Thank you, Natalie. Which brilliantly brings into the discussion phase. And as I said, I'm putting myself on the line. I'm not saying anyone else felt this way, or this is me. I'm not projecting onto anyone. This was my challenge, and I'm here to learn from your discussion, your input. So if there's anything that I would like you to take away from myself, is that the world is a lot more complex than simple reading of the text would indicate. And it's masked complexities that may be a challenge to understand. That's all the point that I'm fundamentally making. And Natalie's brought up the point that things have moved rapidly from, say, 2019, and which is fair. So there's an interesting concept. So when you were younger, when we are younger in age, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, you know, a year felt so much more, or so much more longer than what it feels like today. And we say to ourselves, man, time is going fast. But if you ask a 10-year-old, you know, a year from Christmas to Christmas, it feels like forever that it happens. Because if you, a simple math, like as a 10-year-old, 1 year would only represent 10% of their life, right? So it's an absolute big portion. So all of their memories, all of their experiences, you know, it's a big portion that fills up their memory, their quick memory. Whereas as you get older, and I'm going to say, say a 50-year-old, you know, that same 10% is a 5-year period. So it will feel the same way that the 10-year-old experiences 1 year, a 50-year-old would experience 5 years worth of memories, emotions, recollections. So it does feel faster because we are naturally getting older. So 2019 happened, we almost 2024. It's almost, you know, 4 years, 5 years, which feels like the blink of an eye. It does. 5 years almost feels nothing at the moment, but maybe when we were younger, 5 years felt a whole lot longer. It's just an interesting point. It's anyone else would
Yeah,
like to contribute, challenge?
well, just in support of what you're saying about time scales, how you view time. I remember watching Star Wars in the early 70s, and I remember Captain's Log, the year 2020. And to me, that was like, oh man, that we were counting years in 19 something, and this is 2020. I couldn't even imagine that. And here I am today, Captain's Log 2023, and we're still going forward. And I'm hearing net zero has to be achieved by the year 2030. I'm saying, yeah, you're joking. That's like a couple of years from now. You know, it's impossible. But the way the world is moving is honestly, it's it's no more what it used to be. We are tumbling towards the end very swiftly.
Anyone else? Just a thought while maybe someone is preparing their thoughts, is that the rise of the Chaldeans to dominate the Syrians or dominate that region, and while it felt instantaneously in the way that the text is presented, that was actually over a period of, say, 20, 25 years that it took from Nabopolassar to the point where Nebuchadnezzar was king over and ruled over Babylon. So even in that text, it comes across as in it happened in a, you know, a relative in a short space of time, short period of time. It was still 20 odd years, and you know, our time of the end was 1989. We are beyond 30 years now. So I don't know. It feels that time, our concept of time, it's never been God's concept of time. But like the years feel like they're flying by. And even if I say God comes in 10 years or 15 years, physically it won't feel as long as the words 15 years sound like. My thoughts.
Courtney, I think I've got a couple of thoughts from what you were saying.
Yeah.
One of them was that verse that you read in Habakkuk. Do you see that as a prophecy of the Babylonians and their swift rise to power then? This marvelous work. Do you see that the point of the Babylonian?
So I'm going to be careful and say yes, in the sense that Habakkuk was crying out to God and he was saying, you know, what about all the injustice? Why won't you hear our people? And God was saying, hold on, just watch. I'm going to do a work. And this was this work would lead to the fall of Israel and them going into captivity, under Babylonian captivity. So in that regard, yes, it was a prophecy that would eventually directly affect the Israelite people. That's how I've read that text.
Yeah, it seems like it's almost like a prediction of how that wickedness is going to do its work in such a swift, amazing way in some ways, although we know on another level it's a tool in the hand of God to punish Israel. There's all that kind of deep. But I'm thinking in our time, the rapidity of even, the Ukraine war, that the king of the south and the king of the north coming to a head over Ukraine, and how we got a taste of how the whole world got involved in that fight, really, even if people didn't directly support, the allies or America and Europe against them. It's impacted the economies of the world in a way that I don't think we could have predicted. Then you've got the wheat with Ukraine, you've got the oil prices, you've got loads of stuff happening there, which is almost impacting every country. And you can see how quickly the whole world could go into a meltdown over that conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So I think we've got a taste of how rapid the end time, wickedness can come to a head. And the other thought was what you were saying about how when we're young, everything seems to take long, and time seems a lot longer than it does when you get older. And it feels like in the movement that somehow we've gone through a lot more than previous generations in our understanding, in our experience, that since 1989 we are one generation in a way, but at the same time we seem to have gone through so many dispensations and so many generations. It's like we've lived the experience of past ages all at once. It feels like that all the histories of past ages have come to a head in our time, and we've gone through all that stuff, which is rapid when you think about it. We've gone through 6,000 years of history in our dispensation. It feels like the stuff we've learned, the first angel's message, and then now the third. There's a huge amount of growth that has happened to us, which is unprecedented in terms of a person growing up. And I'm thinking, it feels to me like we've gone now to adult stage, where we were children before, we were looked after, we were taught by teachers, we looked up to them. It was like having parents, and we were nurtured and fed and nourished and all those kind of things. And now we're being like pushed out of the nest and expecting to stand for ourselves. Like when we get adult, we have to get our own house, we have to live by ourselves, be individual, be stand alone, all those kind of ideas. It feels like that's what we're going through as a movement. At the same time, we're getting this message that we need to meet in person, we need to press together, we're a body. This is not good that we're all individually isolated on Zoom, those kind of sentiments. But at the same time, I think we're all being so tested individually about our walk with God and that endurance. Are we going to make a success of our experience or not? And that's how, when children leave the nest, are they going to be successful? What are they going to do? Are they going to earn money? Are they going to get a house? Are they going to get married and settle down and get happiness? When we look at worldly terms of children growing up. With us, it's like, are you going to stay to the principles of your parents? Are you going to follow those things? It's almost like we're each one now having to decide, are we really fully on board with what we've been taught or not? And we have to now make decisions based on that without that support and guidance that we perhaps had before. It feels like, and that's why it feels like a long time. It feels like we've grown up like we've gone through a whole life in the last 20 years. It really feels like it's like, whoa, this is so packed, we can't take it. And if we can't keep up with that growth process, it's like, you can't walk with the footman, how can you run with the horseman? How can someone join now when they haven't gone through that experience? And it's really bringing it home to me about the parable of 10 virgins, that you can't give that oil. You can't give someone a whole lifetime's experience. And that's almost, it feels like what we've had in this movement.
Okay. Yes. So on your last point, say someone joins the movement now, how do you view, or what are your thoughts on how they will catch up to where we are? Because as you said, and I ascribe to that idea that we can't give them the oil, that character development, that experience. You can't give them that. They have to essentially earn it for themselves. How are they going to, and this is me asking without a conclusion or an answer to it. How do you view them catching up to speed, as you may?
I think one of the things I'm thinking is, I think Elder Paminda alluded to this in recent presentations about how people are going to be tested perhaps differently and have individual Sunday laws. He didn't put it like that, but I'm thinking the test might not be the same for each person in each country. The individuals are going to be perhaps are going through their own struggle. But I think there is an element that if you look at the priest-Levite model, priests, Levites and Nephilims, that they're not going to catch up. Say if we believed, which I think we still do, the priests of the 144,000, that the others do not have the experience, Levites and Nephilims will not have the experience the priests have had. And so, yes, they can come in, they can get information, they can get intellectual knowledge, which anyone can get. And that's the point I was thinking when I said Elder Verinder alluded to, was the fact that people can learn this message in 5 years. I think he did this at one of the camp meetings, because someone said, how long did it take you to learn equality? And they said 5 years. He said, so let's get to heaven. It takes them 5, 10 years. What we're going to be doing for the rest of the 1,000 years, you know? So it doesn't take long to learn information, but the experience required to settle into it, that sealing into the truth, is something different. And I suppose I have to lean back on, they'll be judged according to the light they have. They will perhaps be able to catch up with lots of information, maybe not all the details that we have, or some of us have, or that we can't remember even necessarily, but I think they can actually take on board a lot of information. But to live through that information is something else. To be tested on it, to be rejected by friends, to lose friends, the whole thing we've been through, to stand up against the church, in a sense, to be willing to be thrown out of it, to have that break up with relatives and friends, and that pain of that experience is something I don't think we can pass to someone else. And so they'll have had their own experience, obviously, growing up in the world, whatever they were doing. Even if they were in the church, they probably might have had some opposition. I'm sure everyone's had trials, everyone has suffering. So it isn't that they haven't tasted that kind of experience, but the actual experience of being a priest is different, I think. And so I think they won't catch up is one quick answer. And when we get to heaven, how will we catch up with Adam? Are we ahead of Adam? It's that whole question about, does he actually know more because he had face-to-face communion with God? But is that kind of conflict with, do we know more because we've experienced more of the suffering, of the pain of sin, and the being the last generation is a different experience to being the first, and just that. And that keeps coming to my mind, that quote where Ellen White says, we will be closer to God than if we had never sinned, because we've been through sin. And you think how is that? He creates Adam and Eve perfect, creates that couple perfect, in harmony with him, meets with God every day. So I'm going to say him there, but Jesus, I was thinking when they met with Jesus, but they meet God every day. They talk face to face with God. They can ask whatever question they want. And we don't know how long that period went before they sinned. And yet we're going to be closer now than if we'd never gone through this process. So there's something about entering into the suffering of sin that connects us with God in a way that the rest of God's creation is not going to have to be connected. Yeah. And I feel that's really powerful.
It's what I was just thinking about that the other day. I was just thinking about sin. If it wasn't for sin, we wouldn't be able to have gone to get closer to Christ. Because I was just thinking at the same time, and I was thinking about the other worlds. I was just thinking the same thing, because I don't think they have that experience as we would they? No. I was thinking exactly the same thing.
I was just going to ask about that quote where it says they have to catch up in whatever weeks or years. So I do believe if someone did come into this movement from the world, they've had the experience of equality, that what they'd have to obviously attain to would be the vows, would be 9/11, would be the role of Islam in prophecy, would be, because I think they've got the equality message, whether they're in the church or whether they're in the world. So it would be more, if they were coming from the church, it would be, they'd know all about Ellen White and the prophecies, but if it was the world, they'd have to just believe in the vows, basically, which would be quite easy to catch up with. And that's what we are here for. We are meant to be ready. So if someone did come in, we could teach them from start to finish in a short time.
Yeah, which I think would anchor their faith in this message in a way that they haven't perhaps got that anchor at the moment.
There's a message in the chat, Courtney. No. It's from Nelda. We definitely need to keep this to heart more on days when we feel despondent to the things of this world. Moments when we feel overwhelmed by the tasks, challenges, and advocacy of our equality, equity, feminism messages.
Oh, the first bit missed.
Oh, yeah, she said it was a really thought-provoking study for her. And she said, thank you. We'll definitely make me pause next time I sing How Great Thou Art.
As humans, we can never
feel electorally, as humans, we can we ever fully intellectually, emotionally comprehend the complexity of God? One thing that's become clear to me over time is that even that all this, or he still calls us his greatest love creation, so much so that we can say that he sent his son for us to die. Did you hear that, Courtney?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. Amen. So I guess a question that pops into mind is that the new joiners, will have an intellectual assent to the truth, say on radical feminism, say on equality, and even, and this is the focus of my question, say the Sabbath. But it's more than an intellectual assent, it's an emotional assent as well. Do we have an emotional or an experience in all of those things? Do we actually feel it as part of us? So the question is, the joiners, what, because the statement was people can learn this message in a fairly short period of time. In the grand scheme of things, it's a short period of time. But what about the emotional experience of that day? Can they, it's a broad statement, can people get an emotional experience the same level that we have? Maybe the answer is no to that there, broadly. So will people simply go to heaven without emotionally attaching themselves to the Sabbath or having an experience in the Sabbath?
I think if they join this movement, even if it's a year before the end, they'll have had their emotional experience with regard to equality, like you said, and all the other things, and the Sabbath, and you're talking about the Sabbath, but like for things in my life, I had an emotional experience in 1 hour, in one day over 25/20. I had an emotional experience when I was told about the Sabbath, like that's it, keeping the Sabbath. And times I cried and was on my knees, couldn't believe that I'd been brought to the truth. So I think it's very easy to, what you're saying, you can have an intellectual knowledge of the truth, but you have understanding, because if once you have understanding, then you're connected emotionally. So yeah, I think it's very possible.
I wanted to add to that. That's something else I was thinking when you were talking about complexity, how obviously with parable teaching, we want to put things in boxes. We want to compare and contrast. We want to simplify. We want to make it black and white. So we often do this left and right, left and right wing. And then we say, actually, it's not that clear. Or we say, the human being is made up of the physical and the mental. And what's the mental look like? It's lower and higher powers. It's spiritual. It's moral, it's emotional, it's what are feelings. We learned that thoughts and feelings make up character. So thoughts are the higher powers and feelings are the lower powers. And we started separating them out and saying feelings are just feelings in the body, they're not. And then we recognize actually feelings are thoughts and they're not really separate. It's all thoughts. So how do you process that? What do you do with that? So the complexity of a human being to me is kind of like the microcosm, the smallest unit. We talk about the humans and the family and then the nation and then the world and then the universe. And you've done that this morning with that whole vastness of it. And yet when we boil it down to the human brain, it's so complex, and we are so complex that I don't think each one of us has an emotional experience every day. And each one of us has our own, even in the movement now, even those who've been in the movement at the same time, say you've been in here 10 years or 20 years or even 5 years, however many years it is, your experience is totally unique to you, Courtney, and mine is totally unique to me. And so whatever you've been through, I cannot possibly get inside your experience and see really the suffering, the struggles, the trials, the temptations that you've been through, that you've overcome, that mine are different. And so I think with that comes a level of that whoever comes in, like Natalie says, whenever, they're going to have an experience straight away. They have emotions straight away. They might be tested straight away. That whole thing is very complex, individual to individual. It's very individual. And I think we have to recognize that and trust in God ourselves for that process.
And I think there'll be very
are you saying that it's going to be harder for a new person to join because of those emotional experiences? But I agree with Natalie that you can have that emotional. Like I said, I've got a friend who wants to join, and he when he heard about the Sabbath, even though his brother in Australia, who he probably hasn't seen for a number of years, is an SDA. when he heard about the Sabbath, he was going, wow. He says, are we all hoodwinked to think, even if it's, it's in the Bible, to think that Sunday is a day of worship? He was quite happy and quite grieved that people could think that there's another day to worship on. So I went with him to visit a friend the other day, and whenever he sees anybody, he brings up the subject of the Sabbath. He goes, well, why aren't you worshiping on the Sabbath? So he was quite excited about his newfound understanding of the Sabbath. So I think everybody's experience is going to be different and is going to be emotional.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, I have a couple of questions, and if you'll allow me to try and order my thoughts. So I think in that I think we're still masking, as Emma has said, and I wanted to try and fit this part into my presentation, but ran out of time in my preparation, on the complexity of them, the human mind, and the complexity of thought and consciousness. And it's a concept that science can't explain. No matter how hard they try, they can't explain consciousness, and we accept it as being a gift from God, right? But because we are all different and emotional beings, it's hard to say that everyone will have an emotional experience about, say, on stuff. So the idea that we'd say to large groups of people, like intelligent people, fairly intelligent, the Sabbath, it's simple to me and you. We look at it and we go, this is as simple as it comes. But there have been millions and billions of people throughout today and throughout human history who've read the same text and all who struggle with understanding or accepting the Saturday Sabbath. And in maybe broad brushing and saying, maybe they don't have an emotional experience, that's why they don't understand the Sabbath. I think it's more complex than those words. And I know I'm simplifying the discussion, but I think that's maybe part of what makes me nervous, is the downplaying of the complexity of humans in this whole process, in that even people who walked with Christ still rejected him. And they will have their reasons for it. And, some of them may even sound reasonable. And I say that definitely in inverted commas. And the human element, the human complexity in all of this here, sometimes gets masked away when we use broad brush statements that we will all have an experience. Maybe they have. In the old SDA church, we used to baptize hundreds of people after a campaign, but the retention was low. Like, most people just never returned. They ascended to the truth intellectually. They've had an emotional experience that they went through. They decided, yes, we're being baptized, but it never followed through, like, in the long term, and most of those people actually left. So I don't know. I'm just saying it feels like there's a little bit more complexity in that process that may have been alluded to.
I wanted to come back to Cedric's question about am I saying, I think she was saying, is it harder to come in? And I don't know if I'd like to use that term, because when I became an Adventist, it seemed easy. It's like you just said about some people see the Sabbath. I saw the Sabbath, it made sense. I saw the great controversy. I saw Satan and God warring, and I thought, that makes sense. Well, there's wickedness. It's not God doing it. There were so many questions I had answered that when I first became Adventist, I thought, wow, this is fantastic. God answered prayers. I saw miracles. It seemed really close, that faith was a real experience with God, and you were excited in that first love thing. So I don't know if it's going to be harder for people. In one way, we could say it's harder to come in at the last minute, and quotes like, it takes them months. They're going to have to learn in months what it took us years. So they're going to have to, jam pack it in, and it's going to be hard work. But at the same time, there's things that make me think it's easier to come in because the priest's experience has been hard graft from the beginning. And there's something different about 145,000, which we've said are the people that have come from the beginning. They're priests. So there's something about that experience which is perhaps harder, you could say. But again, it's very complex and very individual. So someone can come in and have an easy experience, someone can come in and have a very hard experience. You just don't know whether, I don't know if you can quantify it in those terms. But I think behind your kind of question, or one of them is what actually is it that drives someone to accept truth and doesn't, when you were saying about Sabbath and how some people really see the Sabbath clearly and others just cannot see it or don't want to see it. And we don't see the complexity of their motives, their understanding, all those things. But there's something about this truth which brings a sword and divides into two classes. And even that, I'm not sure we can see that clearly, but we know it's something we've been told that, but because there seem to be sometimes areas of grey, it doesn't make it that clear that there's people, so at what point is someone saved or lost? At what point is someone converted? Like you said, thousands come into Adventism and lots go out because they're not grounded. And I think that shows the complexity of the process of becoming a Christian. This is not an overnight thing. To change your whole way of thinking and belief, for some people it seems a lot quicker than others. And we know that too with conversion. Some people it's very quick, some people it's very slow. And even then, this growth process, we see that all around in nature. Things grow at different speeds, different rates. So even us all sitting here, we're all at different places with God in our understanding, in our experience, in our emotions. And I think that really has to be taken into account when looking at the bigger picture. Like you say, it is very complex. But at the same time, God has set out like waymarks on a line to make it more simple, to see that we can sort of navigate where we are, to have some bearings, as it were, on this journey and be in this situation together in some way, so that we're separate but linked. And that seems to be what's happening all the time, this kind of linking and separating and linking,
singing the same song,
trying to get everybody onto some kind of similar page of their understanding and their acceptance. And they're honest in heart, if we use that phrase, whoever they are, it seems will come together in that process, whether they're Nethinims, Levites, priests. If they've got some honesty in there, a desire for that will bring people together. And it's not just about the doctrine and the words on the page.
The living testimony will draw them.
Yeah.
So that's why we need to be sort of looking at our own job in this walk.
Just to remind you, Courtney, you had over an hour.
It's got 15 minutes.
Got 15 minutes left.
Okay. Well, I don't have materially much more to say. Again, throughout this discussion, the point that keeps coming back is that it's so much more complex than, simple words on a page, especially as we're dealing with human beings who bring all of their biases, who bring all of their experiences to a decision. And I don't know, it feels challenging to try and comprehend how humans make decisions, because, and I think we've all said, Sabbath or the vows, they make sense. They make sense. Like, as clear as day, they make sense. But people still can't ascend to them. And it confuses me, it has confused me, like, oh, why can't we see this here? Surely it's as clear as day. In the old days, we'd say, the Catholic Church has written, they changed the Sabbath in the Catechism of Roman Doctrine or something. It's there, it's in their own words. Why won't you believe this? And it's, I don't know. It's complex.
Didn't you have that feeling when you first became Adventist? Why isn't the whole world Adventist?
So yes, my experience is that I was born directly into the Adventist church. So I never had the chance to question why, in the early decision, like in growing up, question why I'm an Adventist in that regard. But my experience is I've lived through it 30 odd years, and I'm like, wow, it's just so simple. Why can't people understand this here? And I would tell anyone who would want to listen, in the very early years of our relationship between my marriage partner and myself, it was a debated topic as to she did not grow up Adventist, and I was maybe in the wrong in trying to almost force feed in the early years Adventist doctrine. And I was like, why can't you understand this? It's so simple. But over the years, I mellowed and took a step back, and she came to that understanding or experience on her own. And that's my experience on like the Sabbath and I don't know. It's complex. And if anyone asks me anything, I'm always going to say, oh man, it's complex.
I think the simple there's an enemy at work. Sorry, go on here, Brian.
I just wanted to refer back to that video Courtney showed from YouTube about the vastness and expanse of the universe and how small and almost like insignificant Earth is in all that. And then look at how we look at waymarks, the time taken from one waymark to the next waymark. Sometimes, as Courtney was saying, we oversimplify that. We're just moving from post to post, from period to period. Yet in between all that, there's this vastness of activity that is taking place. And we look at, let's take, for example, we now in studying equality, and within equality, we majoring on equality of the sexes. And even within that, we find there are different, how do you put it? Different topics within of the sexes, and it just keeps going deeper and deeper. So when we make declarations on any given subject, we should always think a little bit more. And it's dangerous to give definite in whatever we are discussing, because there's so much in between those time sets that we can be in danger on missing out on a lot of things. And that's how some people get disillusioned.
Right.
Yeah.
The prophets must give definites.
Must give definites. We haven't given.
We've given definites. This movement's given definites. We have to close of probation. 2019, King of the South, King of the North, equality. We have to same-sex marriage. We have to give definites, but that from God, of course, from the prophet.
Yeah, I can agree with that to a certain extent, but yeah, we're meeting in November, and I'll come back to us with a few more detailed
Look forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you. So in conclusion, I'm just going to wrap up with a final thought and a kind of a recommendation. At work, we had diversity training, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. It hit all the nails on the head. And I was just grinning throughout it, going, man, I really wish I could give this whole presentation to the fellowship that I'm with, because, yeah, everything that we've been speaking about, the lady was giving it. And I felt, justified or vindicated in my belief that, okay, the world is, or some parts of the world are identifying with radical feminism. And this is a tech company, so there is an incredible bias against women in tech. So I was grinning throughout. I'm going, yes, finally, yeah, someone is saying it. And the comments in the Teams chat that was there were from women and minority groups, and most white males just stayed off and didn't mention a thing. And I thought it was so enlightening that it was freaking, it was hitting a point, it was striking a nerve. Anyway, the lady that gave the presentation wrote a book. It's called The Loudest Duck. And I'd encourage you to read it. It talks on diversity in the workplace. And it was a good read. I read through it. It was a good read. But in conclusion, she brought up this one particular image. I don't know if you are able to see it, if I'm still sharing my screen.
Yes,
About
we can see it.
Okay. So she said, we like to, in diversity, basically group into a number of segments, say ethnicity, race, gender, and age. And most diversity training, she was saying, is about this year, these 4 topics. Whereas there's so much more that goes into a human being that differentiates us from the next person. Say, for example, myself and Curtis, we come from the exact same family. You would almost want to group us in the exact same category. But even underneath all of that, I have a completely different thinking style, maybe even education to Curtis, or marital status. And these differentiators are influences in my decision-making, and differentiate between all of us. All of that there to say, when someone is confronted, say, with a Sabbath question, it's easy to say, and I'm again speaking from my own personal experience, it's easy for me to say, it's so easy, why can't you understand this here? Like, it's so simple, it's as clear as black and white on the paper. You believe the Bible? Yes. Do you believe the week is 7 days? Yes. What day is the 7th day of the week? Saturday. The Bible says the 7th day shall be a Sabbath. It's simple, why can't you understand that? And then this is me arrogantly not understanding or taking time to appreciate all of this complexity that person is facing or has grown up with. No conclusion. It was just a closing thought that I think it's far more complex, and it will be for eternity. Sister White says we'll be starting the plan of salvation for eternity. So to think we will arrive at a definitive answer today in this life, earthly life, I think is maybe a little not misguided, but I think it's premature to think we'll solve all of this here. There might be small things that we are trying to, gender 100%, race, we've touched on it, and I think we have an understanding, but there's so much more to humans that need understanding. Thank you, everyone. I didn't anticipate this year going as long as it did, but thank you for your contribution. I appreciate the discussion. And hopefully we can take something forward that we can, most important, implement in our day-to-day life. I think this is not a theoretical message, it's a personal one, and it should impact our personal day-to-day interactions with ourselves and with the world at large. Amen. I'll just close in a quick word of prayer. Dear God, again, we come before you, thanking you for our discussion and the thoughts that have been presented. May you help us refine our thoughts, untangle some of the complexities, and even if it's a thread or two that we can hold on to, that will refine our characters, that will help us be more presentable to you. May you help us to clear our understanding on these topics. We thank you for the Sabbath. We thank you for the fellowship. We pray that we may continue to have a wonderful Sabbath and enjoy the rest that is the Sabbath. We thank you, O Lord, in your holy and precious name. Amen.